Climate change dominated talks as Prime Minister Modi met with US President Barack Obama on the sidelines of UN General Assembly. There were other bilateral meets as well as Prime Minister wrapped up his US visit. All the details and much more in the next half an hour in Breakfast Bulletin. I am Aishwarya Kapoor with you. Let us begin with the headlines. Prime Minister Modi and President Obama meet for the third time in a year, discuss climate change, strategic partnership and terrorism. US reiterates backing for India's permanent seat at UNSC. 50 countries pledged some 40,000 peacekeepers at UN summit. Prime Minister Modi says success of peacekeeping operations depend on UN's moral force. Reserve Bank to announce a fourth bi-monthly monetary policy statement. This comes at a time with an all-time low inflation and faltering growth. Protesting FTII students to hold talks with INB officials. Students demand dissolving current FTII society and bring transparency for appointing management. And 30 people missing after an overcrowded mechanized boat with about 200 people on board capsizes in the river Koloni in Assam. Well, our top focus, Prime Minister Narendra Modi wrapped up his week-long tour of the United States. Now, the high point of his visit were his UN address in which he said that India's blueprint to sustainable development is in tune with the goals set by the UN. Modi also held wide-ranging talks with business heads, including meeting with chiefs of Fortune 500 companies. Now, his visit to the Silicon Valley, a first by an Indian Prime Minister in 30 years, was very well received. The Facebook interaction with the chief, Mark Zuckerberg, and visit to the Google campus were the highlights of his visit to the West Coast.
The third Modi-Obama meet since May last year, this time on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. The two leaders discussed a host of issues, including stepping up economic engagement and climate change.
President and I share an uncompromising commitment on climate change without affecting our ability to meet the development aspirations of humanity. We have both set ambitious national agendas. In India, our measures include not just a plan to aid 175 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2022.
How we can further refine our strategic vision, our common joint vision, moving forward for security and partnerships. And that encompasses everything from scientific exchanges and educational exchanges to security cooperation.
The meeting gave the two leaders an opportunity to build on the discussions they had in New Delhi in January. The Modi-Obama meeting comes close on the heels of the conclusion of the inaugural strategic and commercial dialogue between the US and India. The US President also agreed with Prime Minister Narendra Modi that Kashmir is a bilateral issue to be resolved between India and Pakistan, as terrorism emanating from Pakistan also came up during the discussion.
Our defense cooperation, including defense trade and training, is expanding. As extinct terrorism threats grow and new ones emerge, we have resolved to further deepen cooperation on counter-terrorism and radicalism.
We agreed that this is a critical issue for the world, that all of us have responsibilities. We are encouraged by the aggressive nature of President Modi's commitment to clean energy, and what I indicated to the Prime Minister is that I really think that India's leadership in this upcoming conference will set the tone not just for today, but for decades to come.
The US President also reiterated support for India's permanent membership of the United Nations Security Council, while Modi pressed for reform of the world body within a fixed time frame.
UN Security Council reform, President Obama reiterated the support that he has publicly articulated in favor of India being a permanent member of the Security Council. And there was discussion that now that the intergovernmental negotiation process is going to start on the basis of text, how India and the US could collaborate on that front.
Britain and France also reaffirmed their support for India's permanent membership of the UNSC. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
All right, and now Mr. Gautam Adhikari, Senior Fellow, Center for American Progress, is joining us from New York. Gautam, thank you so much for joining us. Gautam, now President Obama met with Prime Minister Modi. What are the big takeaways for India from this third meeting between the two leaders in a year, especially on the backing for the UNSC permanent seat?
It was a very good meeting, I'm told. It was an hour-long meeting, accompanied by the usual hugs. But the point is that, don't forget, this was the third meeting between the two heads, the head of government and the head of state here, in 1 year, which is very unusual for most countries to have, and especially for the United States to arrange meetings of the President of the US with another head of government so frequently. And I'm told that there's some talk already of another visit or coming up in April or sometime early next year. Okay. So that is significant. So clearly there is a perception that is growing in the United States of the importance of India and the importance of India's role as a democracy as well as a strategic partner. Yeah.
All right. Also, much talked about was PM Modi's trip to the West Coast. How do you look at that visit?
I think the big takeaway is that he has projected India as an alternative digital world to China. Don't forget that President Xi Jinping was also in the West Coast, in Seattle, yes, before coming to Washington. And I think Mr. Modi's visit at that point of time was not purely coincidence, but it was very, very interesting that both countries were wooing the digital world of Silicon Valley and the West Coast in general for their own development purposes and projecting each country as a very viable partner of the United States in that respect.
Right. Gautam, there is a huge excitement in India back home as far as this visit is concerned. But how is the Modi visit being covered in the US media?
I'm afraid there wasn't all that much coverage. There are two reasons for that. One is that the Pope was here, so it was saturation coverage for the Pope. And then Xi Jinping also was in the country, and China is considered the second most powerful nation on earth right now, and that made a big difference. Okay. Besides, both the Pope and Xi Jinping came to Washington, so that made a big difference. Mr. Modi didn't really come to Washington. It was not a state visit. He went to Silicon Valley and he went to the UN General Assembly. It was not, the New York visit was not exactly a visit to the US, it was a visit to the UN. But there he had a meeting. So there has to be a more concerted effort, I think, on India's part to project itself in the media field in this country, to bring up its image, make it a little more prominent. And there are ways of doing it. I'm sure there are people who are going to look into it.
Right. Gautam Adhikari there joining us from New York. Thank you so much for that. And Prime Minister Modi also held bilateral talks with his British counterpart, David Cameron, on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly Summit in New York. Now, Modi and Cameron had last met at a G20 summit in Brisbane in November 2014, where the latter had called relations with New Delhi as its top foreign policy priority. Now, the two leaders discussed bilateral and global issues such as terrorism, UN Security Council reforms, and climate change. Now, more than 50 countries have pledged more than 40,000 peacekeepers for possible deployment on United Nations missions, as well as helicopters, medical units, and training and equipment to deal with the roadside bombs. And this announcement was made by US President Obama at the Summit of World Leaders at the United Nations to garner commitments to boost the capacity and capabilities of UN peacekeeping and to allow the world body to deploy forces more rapidly if a new operation is created. Now, China made one of the biggest commitments. President Xi Jinping pledged to set up a permanent peacekeeping police squad and build a peacekeeping standby force of 8,000 troops. India committed to the peacekeeping efforts and announced contribution of one additional battalion of Indian troops comprising 850 soldiers, 3 police units and higher representation of women peacekeepers to such missions. Prime Minister Modi, however, said that the success of peacekeeping ultimately depends not only on the weapons the soldiers carry, but by the moral force of the UNSC. He also added that the problems arise to a large extent because troop contributing countries do not have a role in decision-making process. Well, heightened diplomacy surrounding the Syrian conflict, the UN Assembly laid bare stark divisions among the world leaders on ending the 4-year-long civil war. The US and Russia have long differed on the subject. US President Obama opposes Syrian President Assad staying in power, while Russia has been a staunch ally. But amid the inevitable trials and setbacks, both leaders have taken steps to find a political solution in Syria.
The Syrian conflict was central to most leaders' address at the UN General Assembly. With leaders expressing varied views on ending the war in Syria, the vast divisions in their approach came to the fore. The United States and France insisted that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad was the chief culprit behind the 4-year civil war, and he must go for any progress to be made to stamp out terrorism. Obama said a compromise among major powers would be essential to end the regional conflict.
We see some major powers assert themselves in ways that contravene international law. We see an erosion of the democratic principles and human rights that are fundamental to this institution's mission. We're told that such retrenchment is required to beat back disorder, that it's the only way to stamp out terrorism or prevent foreign meddling. In accordance with this logic, we should support tyrants like Bashar al-Assad, who drops barrel bombs to massacre innocent children, because the alternative is surely worse.
But Russia had a contrasting stand, saying it would be an enormous mistake not to cooperate with Assad's forces to tackle the Islamic State militants. Putin said Russia might be willing to join airstrikes against IS, but ruled out any troops on ground. Moscow even suggested creation of a broad anti-terror coalition to fight the IS, largely comprising of Muslim nations. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani too voiced support to help pave the way for democracy in Syria.
Сегодня мы оказываем военно-техническую помощь и Ираку, и Сирии, другим странам региона, которые ведут борьбу с террористическими группировками. Считаем огромной ошибкой отказ от сотрудничества с сирийскими властями, правительственной армией, с теми, кто мужественно лицом к лицу сражается с террором.
ما همون گونه که در عراق و افغانستان به استقرار دموکراسی کمک کردیم، آماده کمک به دموکراسی در سوریه و نیز یمن هستیم.
Some Western leaders have recently softened their stance towards the Syrian president, conceding that he might be able to stay on during a political transition. Despite several failed diplomatic efforts, the UNGA provides another break to find a political solution in the Middle East. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, UN Peacekeeping Summit in New York also saw Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Pakistani counterpart Nawaz Sharif waving at each other. Now assembling for the Leaders Summit on Peacekeeping being hosted by US President Barack Obama, Modi walked into the conference hall first. Sharif followed a few minutes later and waved at Modi. The Indian Prime Minister then waved back and smiled. Then there was a pause, after which Modi waved again and Sharif acknowledged and smiled. Now, the two leaders who are in New York New York for UN summits came across each other for the first time. Modi and Sharif were in the chambers for almost an hour and a half. The two leaders clapped at the end of each other's speech as well. Modi left immediately after addressing the summit. He did not walk up to any leader to shake hands. Now, Sharif left the summit about 10 to 15 minutes after him.
पाकिस्तान के प्रधानमंत्री ने कश्मीर जो मुद्दा उठाया है वहाँ पे, वो हमारे हिसाब से कश्मीर तो हमारा अंदरूनी मामला है। वो अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर जाने से हमारे लिए कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता है। हमारे लिए मुद्दा आतंकवाद है और आतंकवाद के मुद्दे पर चर्चा होना चाहिए और किसी विरुद्ध से पाकिस्तान और पाकिस्तान की धरती से आतंकवादियों को जो समर्थन दे रहा है वो बंद होना चाहिए।
नवाज शरीफ कभी यूनाइटेड नेशंस में कश्मीर का मुद्दा उठाते हैं, कभी सीज़फायर का मुद्दा उठाते हैं, उल्टा चोर कोतवाल को डांटे, वो हमारे ऊपर इल्ज़ाम लगाते हैं, अपने गिरेबान में झांक कर नहीं देखते।
ये बात तो उनको समझ में अब तक आ जानी चाहिए थी कि ये हिंदुस्तान और पाकिस्तान के बीच में बैठकर इसका कोई रास्ता निकालने की ज़रूरत है। इस तरह से बार बार यूएन में जाकर उस मसले को उठाने से कोई उसका हल नहीं होगा।
पाकिस्तान बार बार इसको अंतर्राष्ट्रीय जगत पर उठाने में कामयाब रहता है। भारत को डिप्लोमेटिकली पाकिस्तान को आइसोलेट करने के प्रयास और तेज करने चाहिए।
And in Breakfast News, we'll take a very short break. We'll be back with much more. Stay with us.
Hello and welcome to India's World. Every time there is internal political polarization in Nepal, Indian policy becomes the punching bag.
You know, we are used for the last 50 years of dealing only with the power brokers, either here or there.
The relationships have gone to such an extent it's a point of no return and all that. I don't think so.
Nobody's saying that.
I don't think so.
Watch experts debate protests in Nepal with Bharat Bhushan in India's World on Rajya Sabha television.
Get live Rajya Sabha session. News, views, reports and analysis you can trust on social media. Subscribe, follow, like Rajya Sabha television.
Well, let's take a look at the other big story of the day. The Reserve Bank will announce its fourth bi-monthly monetary policy statement today. Now, this is taking place at a time when inflation is at an all-time low, but economic growth is faltering. The industry, which also enjoys the government support, is clamoring for a rate cut, but the Reserve Bank is advising caution amid mindless pursuit of growth.
Will he end the status quo on rate cut? That will be the question on everyone's mind on Tuesday when Reserve Bank Governor Raghuram Rajan announces the bank's fourth monetary policy this year.
There is a very sufficient room for the central bank to cut the interest rates, provided if they are sticking to only inflation targeting. But my guess is that right now, apart from inflation, exchange rate and other financial market stability seems to be playing a major role in the mind of RBI governor.
When Rajan assumed office in September 2013, retail inflation was hovering near 10%. It touched 3.78% this July, its lowest since the 1990s. Wholesale inflation growth rate was also negative for the last 9 months and touched minus 4.05% in July, the lowest in 3 decades. But Rajan feels more ground needs to be covered as low inflation is a result of last year's high base effect. He also warns against using interest rate cuts as a quick fix tool for the economy.
It cannot be a quick fix because the rate cut, if it is just to trigger the animal spirits, that's not the way. But if the rate cut can trigger economic growth, that story is entirely different. But it is not one-to-one. We have infrastructure bottlenecks. There are many other things which affects economic growth. So the rate cut per se cannot be.
India's GDP growth declined to 7% in April-June period this year from 7.4% a quarter earlier. It prompted Finance Minister Arun Jaitley to say that common sense demands a rate cut. Jaitley's view were echoed by Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramanian, who said The Indian economy was on a deflationary path and needed a rate cut to boost growth. Krishnanand Tripaঠি's report for Rajya Sabha TV.
News coming in from Assam, where in a major boat mishap, at least 30 people were went missing after an overcrowded mechanized boat with about 200 people on board capsized in the river Kolohi. The incident occurred when people were going to witness an annual boat competition at Gumi in rural Kamrup district of Assam, when a streamer carrying over 200 people to the competition capsized in the river flowing through the district. The boat travelling from Goroimari to Gumi to the competition sank within minutes. It hit a wooden bridge over the river. Almost all the passengers fell into the river, while most of them made it to the banks. The teams of SDRF and NDRF, which reached around 2 hours later, have been pressed into the service and search operations are on. The district collector of Kamrup Rural reached the spot to take stock of the situation.
স্টার্ট করাতে তার মানে নাওখন আপনাদের কোথা যা বলাইছিলেন নাওটু উজান ফেলে আচ্ছা আচ্ছা ভূমি যাওয়াতে নাও বাইসাছি তারপরে যাওয়াতে নাওখন স্টার্ট করতে হাইলত কাম নহল হে হাইলের কাম নহতে এ ফেলে আহি লাগি যাই ফেলে নাওখন তল গল মোটামুটি মানুহ উপরখিনি ওলাইছে কিন্তু বাই ভিতরে যিখিনি আছে তলতিখিনি আমার মতে তো বহু মানুষ থাকবা লাগে নিশ্চয় 50-60 জন মানুষ থাকবা লাগে আচ্ছা আচ্ছা
And in other news, the students of FTII will hold talks with officials from the Information and Broadcasting Ministry today. Now, remember this after the students who are protesting over the appointment of Gajendra Chauhan as Institute's new chairman ended their indefinite hunger strike on Sunday after the government agreed to come to the negotiating table. Now, remember, students are also demanding to dissolve the present FTII society and simultaneously set up a new search committee through a transparent process in a place to look into the appointments of chairperson, members and other staff. The students also want FTII to be given the status of a premier national institute like the IITs and the IIMs so that no bureaucrat is appointed as FTII's director.
Fortunately, today in the morning, they sent an email to us stating that, yeah, there will be a dialogue happening on Tuesday, on 29th of this month at 11 a.m. at Film Division, where it will be seen as a confidence-building measure.
And news from the national capital now. Well, AAP MLA Somnath Bharti, who has been evading arrest for nearly a week, surrendered before police last night. The surrender comes after the Supreme Court ordered him to give up by Monday evening in the domestic violence and attempt to murder case filed by his wife. Bharti, who was accompanied by his lawyer, surrendered at around 10 p.m. The FIR against the former Delhi law minister was registered following a complaint by his wife, Deepika Mitra. Soon after Bharti failed to get relief from the Supreme Court, the Aam Aadmi Party cornered its Malvi Nagar MLA, asking him to surrender immediately to avoid further embarrassment to the party and himself. Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal had also called his party colleague an embarrassment.
Normally in such cases there should be no need to arrest. But in this case, there appear to be some extraordinary features as a result of which the High Court and the Supreme Court rejected his anticipatory bail. And the question therefore arises as to what action will the Aam Aadmi Party take against an MLA of theirs who behaves in this manner.
Well, on to some sports news now. India and South Africa's teams sweated it out on the field yesterday ahead of their upcoming series that comprises 3 T20 matches, 5 one-day international and 4 test matches. Here are all the details.
Indian players upbeat after their first test series win against Sri Lanka since 1993 practiced at the picturesque Himachal Pradesh Cricket Association ground in the northern hill town of Dharamshala, which kickstarts the 2-month-long series on 2nd October.
It gives you a really good feeling as a cricketer to play in such a picturesque ground, and there have been some really good matches here for the Indian team and the IPL as well. So yeah, all in all, I love coming here and playing in this ground.
The South Africa series will be India's toughest assignment yet, post the 2015 World Cup campaign, where they defied expectations to reach the semi-final stage.
And the facilities are amazing. I think everyone's worked really hard in the ground, and we have worked really hard as a team here, so I'm all excited to play here against South Africa.
Meanwhile, South African players who arrived in India on Sunday worked it out at a stadium in New Delhi. South Africa has armed itself with 3 frontline slow bowlers in their squad after recalling leg spinner Imran Tahir and off-break bowler Dane Peat for the series.
We know India is going to be tough under the conditions. We know although they've got some new young players, those players are all still very good players, and they've got some match winners in their sides. We know that they are going to be a tough challenge for us.
After the T20 match in Dharamshala, the action will move to eastern cities of Cuttack and then Kolkata. The first 3 ODIs, meanwhile, will be played at Kanpur, Indore and Rajkot on 11th, 14th and 18th of October, respectively. The series will conclude on 7th of December. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And more sporting action in Sports Beat. Promising midfielder Harjeet Singh will lead the 18-member Indian junior hockey squad in their title defence at the upcoming Sultan of Johor Cup to be played in Malaysia. The tournament begins from 11th of October and ends on 18th. The squad will have Dipson Tirki as the vice captain and will be coached by Harendra Singh. Team India will open their campaign against arch rivals Pakistan on 11th of October and will face Britain on 12th. India won 5 silver and 2 bronze medals at the Asian Rowing Championships. Now, Dattu Baban won silver in men's single sculls, while the duo of Vikram Singh and Shokedar Tomar won silver in lightweight men's double sculls. Rupendra Singh and Sonu Narayan bagged silver in men's double sculls. India also bagged silver in men's 4s and men's 8 events. Ionika Paul won the bronze medal in the women's 10-meter air rifle event at the Asian Air Gun Championship. Other Indians in the event, Pooja Ghatkar, finished 5th, while Apurvi Chandela secured the 8th spot. Notably, this is the first international shooting competition hosted by India after the Commonwealth Games in 2010. UEFA President and FIFA presidential candidate Michel Platini has said that he has offered to come forward to FIFA's Ethics Committee to help resolve any issues relating to the 2011 payment of 12 million Swiss francs that he had received from World Soccer's governing body. Platini's clarification came after Swiss prosecutors referred the payment as disloyal and announced that they were starting criminal proceedings against FIFA President Sepp Blatter. Now let's take a look at what is making the news across the world in World Wrap. Taliban fighters have seized the northern Afghan city of Kunduz, taking control of most areas and freeing hundreds of prisoners from its jail. Hundreds of militants stormed the city before dawn, quickly capturing key buildings and advancing on the airport. The government is preparing to launch a counter-attack to retake the city. Now, Kunduz is strategically important as it acts as a transport hub for the north of the country. The Nepalese government is mulling putting in age and disability restrictions on climbing Mount Everest. Now, under new proposals, no one younger than 18 or older than 75 or with a severe disability would be allowed to climb. The Ministry of Tourism could also insist that all climbers have previous mountaineering experience. Earlier this year, the climbing season was called off after a massive earthquake triggered an avalanche that killed 18 climbers. Scientists have made what they call a critical discovery that could influence current thinking about whether the red planet can support microbial life. Now, scientists think they can now tie dark streaks that are seen on the surface of Mars to periodic flows of liquid water. Now, data from a NASA satellite shows the features which appear to be slopes to be associated with salt deposits. The evidence suggests that water may flow on the surface of Mars during the planet's summer months. Well, ISRO has successfully launched India's first astronomy satellite, AstroSat. With this launch, India has joined a select club of nations having their own space observatories. Vice President Mohammad Hamid Ansari, Prime Minister Narendra Modi were among the leaders to hail this success.
3, 2, 1, 0.
India's first dedicated space observatory was launched by ISRO on Monday from the Center. The PSLV C-30 carried AstroSat along with 6 other foreign satellites into orbit. The mission director said the success of the launch surpassed the expectations of the team at ISRO. The satellite has put India in an exclusive club of nations who have their own space observatory. Only US, Japan, Russia and Europe have own observatories in space.
The astronomical satellite AstroSat and the other 6 commercial satellites, and 4 of them are from US.
You have released it?
And this is, as you know, this is the end result of the dedicated and meticulousness in which our teams, our ISRO teams had put in, and we don't leave anything to a chance, and we attend everything.
With an expected mission life of 5 years, AstroSat is aimed to study distant celestial objects and conduct deeper analysis of star systems. It is seen as a smaller version of NASA's Hubble Space Telescope that was launched in 1990. The satellite weighs over 1,500 kilograms and has been assembled at the Indian Space Research Organisation Centre in Bengaluru. It took the agency 178 crore rupee and nearly 10 years to make it after the project was cleared by the government 11 years ago. Prime Minister Narendra Modi was among a host of leaders who congratulated ISRO for the successful launch. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, another feather in ISRO's cap there. Well, that's it in this edition of Breakfast News. Thanks for watching. Have a great day ahead.